Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm Laurie Bull. Passing a state budget is one of the main responsibilities of the state legislature. And while each year brings its own set of concerns, the past several budget years have been particularly difficult due to the poor economy. Here today to give us an update on this year's process, along with a few other timely issues, is State Representative Warren Kampf of Chester and Montgomery counties. Welcome.
Hi, Laurie.
Luckily, it appears there has been some good news recently about the tax revenue coming into the state in the last month or two. Can you kind of update us on some of those numbers?
Yeah, so in Pennsylvania, we're actually on a July budget year. We end at the very end of June. And so we've just gotten in March and April's revenue numbers, tax revenue numbers, and they're above projections. We're still probably going to end the year beneath the revenue projections that we started out with last July 1st, but the picture is looking in the spring now much better than it was in the fall.
And certainly when Governor Corbett presented his budget in February, I guess it was, he didn't have the benefit of knowing some of these numbers that are a little higher than expected. So because of that, he had to present a budget that was pretty austere and pretty tough in some areas. What budget approach do you think should be taken now that we've seen some of the numbers and a little bit of an upwards trend? And what areas do you want to see some restoration of some money?
Well, I would start out by saying, things are still tight. Mm-hmm. The economy is still not great, and as a result, tax revenue isn't tremendous. We had a difficult budget cycle last year. We reduced spending by $1 billion from $28 to $27 billion because we had to, and we didn't want to raise taxes on people. I think we're still in times like that. The governor made his proposal in February. I think he was at an overall budget of $27.1 billion. The process has more than just begun. The Senate just passed a budget which was $27.6 billion. So that's kind of the next step in the process. So that's an additional $500 million that the Senate's proposal is presuming we will have for next year's budget. It proposes restoring some extra money to K through 12 education, to higher education, and also to parts of the Department of Public Welfare for helping out those people who have intellectual disabilities like Down syndrome. So certainly those are things that I'm in favor of, and the fiscal discipline we've had to impose across the board has had an impact on those areas in a way that, I prefer they wouldn't have to. But we'll have to see how things unfold. $27.1 billion is the governor's proposal. The Senate now has $27.6 billion. We just got that proposal 48 hours ago. So I would say in the next month or so, we'll get through those numbers and come to some resolution.
You in particular, what are your top priorities for the budget and also maybe the priorities of the House Republican caucus?
My priorities are to be fiscally responsible. Certainly our government has important things to do, like help fund education and care for those who cannot care for themselves. But we also have a responsibility to the taxpayers of Pennsylvania, not to overburden them. We've got to make sure that the job sector is robust and that our businesses, our small businesses, are not overburdened. So, I think my priorities are let's not increase taxes on people. Let's live within our means, but let's continue to focus on priorities like K through 12 education, help out our local school districts as much as we can, and continue to work on making Pennsylvania more competitive, more job-friendly for the future.
With these challenging budget times, have you heard from your local school districts about problems and issues they've had?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I represent parts of 4 school districts. And I think all of them are facing budget challenges. I would say this, the same challenges that they face at the local level exist here in Harrisburg. And as many taxpayers know, in the 2 years right after the crash of 2008, we as school districts and also state government were given $3 billion in those 2 years by the federal government to balance, and that money was used to balance the budget instead of
Which
just
it shouldn't have been.
right, instead of just being used for one-time stimulus projects. And that money was gone. It was gone last year. It's still gone. So we have this operating deficit that we're facing. School districts are seeing assessments go down, their assessed value go down. Costs seem to continue to be rising for health care and pension benefits and other things. So we're certainly hearing about that, and I am as an individual legislator.
And I guess if you had to name, the top 3 or 4, whatever issues that you've heard most often from schools, what would they be?
I mean, I think mandate relief. Please, free us from some of the rules that you send down from Harrisburg or from Washington that cost money, that sometimes don't make a lot of sense when you're trying to educate children, and you're not sending dollars along with that rule for us to implement it. So mandate relief, certainly pensions. We have a big pension problem, a huge hole in our pensions that was created by, I honestly think, not funding the pension funds appropriately in the last decade, and granting some benefits in 2001, which we just couldn't afford as a state or as school districts. So I would say those 2, but I also hear about property taxes and a couple of others.
What has already been done to address some of those problems that you mentioned, and are there things on the horizon yet that maybe we haven't heard about that are coming?
Yeah, I mean, we've done some mandate relief. We eliminated some requirements for certifications for teachers for the near term, although over time those are going to come back. I do think that the PSSAs, these are the tests that students have to take every year in various grades. No Child Left Behind is behind that. That's the requirement for that. And the Keystone exams, I've heard quite a lot about the Keystone exams and the costs of implementing that. There's been some, I would say, kind of pullback on that so that the school districts are not facing the same timetable or the same number of subjects as they once were for the Keystone exams. But I've also heard complaints that even that, some school districts have actually invested the resources already, and now they're being told that they don't have to implement some of the work that they've already accomplished. But I think on balance, that kind of mandate relief has going on. We certainly need to do more. I do think on pension reform, something was done before I got up here to change the pensions going forward, but it really didn't fundamentally change them. I've been working on legislation, and I expect to have it hopefully out and introduced in the next couple of weeks, which would, for new hires, require a 401k plan. I think that's something that is long needed, should have been done a while ago, but this is an important time to do it. So, and I think with budgets, I think there is a sensitivity up here in the House and the Senate that we have to do what we can to try to help out the school districts. We're all in this together. They're educating our children. And so we're trying with the fiscal problems we have to get as much down to the local level as possible.
Related to schools and how schools are funded, comes along with that is property tax, and certainly that's a large issue in certain portions of the state. Where are we with property tax reform and maybe providing some relief to homeowners?
Well, we did some relief last June. We eliminated 12 of 14 exceptions to the rule that school districts are supposed to go to the voters and ask for tax increases that are greater than the rate of inflation. So now there are only 2 exceptions, pensions and special education. There is a new bill that's been talked about. It's House Bill 1776, which is another proposal to eliminate the property tax altogether and shift it to the income tax and to the sales tax. Issues with that in my mind, although like others, I don't like the property tax. One is the proposal would send the money to Harrisburg, and so the idea of local control is sort of lost in that proposal.
Or that money comes back centrally and then somehow has to be redistributed. That can be a tricky thing.
Right, and then I think the question is, okay, what's it going to mean to the average citizen in my community? Is it truly going to be a reduction in taxes? How's it going to impact the local economy? There are many employers in my district or right around it. If you extend the sales tax out over transactions that aren't already taxed, you can have an impact on the economy. So I think we have to stay tuned, see what the hearings bring. And I would also say at the local level, wherever the school districts can find a way to control expenses, they absolutely need to do that. I think it's going on here in Harrisburg. I know they're trying at the local level, but they have to continue to do that. We're not in a situation where either the local school district or Harrisburg can reach into some magic jar and find lots of resources to give to these problems.
Along with property taxes is how schools are funded and the funding formula from the state. Adopted, I believe, in 1991, has this clause that says no school can receive less than the prior year. For schools who have a much greater student population than they did back then, it's very harmful. Any discussions about addressing the funding formula?
There definitely are discussions about addressing the formula. That hold harmless clause that you talk about is a problem if your school district is growing, because if yours is growing since our population is flat, somebody else, their school district is shrinking, and yet they're receiving the same dollars that they would have received, say, back when they had more student population. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. It definitely is a quirky formula. A couple of my school districts receive very little compared to other school districts. We do have to keep working at it, but I think in the end, fundamentally we've got to recognize that we're all in this together, both at the local and the state level, and none of the options are tremendous. It's not as if this is the first time we've tried to solve some of these problems, but we're going to keep after it.
This seems like a good place to take a break. When we return, we'll take a look at a number of pro-jobs initiatives that are now law and some that are working their way through the process. Legislative Report will return in just a moment.
Did you know that the chamber of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives contains a painting depicting the 24 hours of the day? Located in the center of the ceiling, the mural titled The Hours was created by artist Edwin Austin Abbey. This wonderful masterpiece charts the setting of the sun, moon, and the many stars that grace the heavens. 24 maidens, who each represent an hour of the day, begin each day in light and gladness and ends in solemn drapery carried on still shoulders. Now you know.
Did you know the Avenue of Flags presentation at Indiantown Gap National Cemetery has over 500 casket flags? Among the flags displayed are Commonwealth, territorial, and military flags. The flags are tied to 20-foot poles spaced 40 feet apart on both sides of the main drive of the cemetery. It takes about 2 hours to set up and take down all of the flags. Volunteers are encouraged to help with this task and must be at least 13 years of age. All of the flags are donated to the Avenue of Flags by families of the deceased. Now you know.
Welcome back to Legislative Report with your state representative, Warren Kampf. We've been discussing the state budget, but now we're going to transition a bit. The best way to help relieve a difficult budget year is to stimulate the economy with job growth. And one sector that really seems to be getting a lot of attention in Pennsylvania's economy is the life science industry. You recently received the honor of being named co-chair of the Life Science Caucus in the House. Congratulations on that, first off.
Thank you.
Can you explain, first of all, just define that industry for the viewers and the promise it holds, and then what the mission of the caucus is?
Well, I think in my district, most folks know what the life sciences industry is. We have many pharmaceutical and bio companies, startups, big companies, medium-sized. It also includes biotechnology and medical instruments, medical technology. And the idea of the caucus is to have several legislators, as many as possible, knowledgeable about the industry and how government can partner with that, and then to promote the agenda of that industry and those employees in that sector in the state government. It also involves talking some with our federal congressmen, because many of the issues that the life sciences industry face are federal or from Washington, D.C. And I think you're spot on. The life sciences industry is a very big part of Pennsylvania's economy. We enjoy a lot of scientists and experienced employees in this sector all around Pennsylvania, but especially down in my area in the 202 corridor. So being part of the life sciences community and being a co-chair, a leader here in the state capitol in that industry, it's important to my district, it's important to Pennsylvania, and it is an honor.
And certainly I would imagine part of it may be working with our universities to get the skilled graduates to stay in Pennsylvania. You know, if we create those jobs, maybe they'll stick around.
No, that's right. And there has been, I mean, you know, there's definitely a history to this. The life sciences community in Pennsylvania and southeastern Pennsylvania has been here. It's well known around the country. In fact, it's well known around the world. And our universities do cooperate in that effort. They are critical to it, and so I'm going to be part of fostering more of that cooperation in the future.
In the past session, House Republicans have really been championing legislation seeking to create a better climate for businesses. And the whole point of that is if things are better for businesses, there will be more job opportunities for people out there. Let's just go through some of the successes, bills that have become law already. One of them is authored by Representative Bob Godshaw, encouraging utilities to upgrade their aging infrastructure. Can you talk about that and why that's important?
Right. Well, the idea here is we have lots of utilities that provide power with natural gas, PECO in our area, but others all around the state. And a lot of those lines, those gas lines, are very old, 60, 70, 80 years old in some cases. People have seen in the news over the last couple of years all around the country, explosions. We've had two or three.
In Allentown area, I believe, as well.
Right, we've had two or three very big ones with fatalities here in Pennsylvania. So this bill would, this law now essentially allows the utilities to accelerate some the replacement of that. And it also includes the power lines for electric utilities. So, you know, that is part of job growth. I mean, when they are doing this work, investing in infrastructure, that is keeping people at work and putting more to work. And many of the utilities have said that this was a bill long in coming, and they're pleased that it's now law.
Another one, the expansion of the KOZ program. What is the KOZ program?
These are the Keystone Opportunity Zones. There are special places around the state, mainly in areas where say it's a brownfield or an older factory that had gone idle. And the idea is to give a sort of a tax relief to any business that's willing to locate there.
For a time being, not, isn't there a limit on the number of years?
That's right, that's right. And so this legislation essentially extended that period of time and also broadened some of the rights for the KOZ zones to exist. They've been successful in many places. In fact, out in western Pennsylvania, Shell Oil announced that they were going to build a very, very costly, multi-billion-dollar plant in the near future. They were choosing between Ohio, western Pennsylvania, and I think West Virginia, and the site that they've chosen is one of these zones. So good to be able to keep that program going.
The Fair Share Act was another one, long time in coming, but it did come.
Right, so the Fair Share Act is lawsuit abuse reform or tort reform. You know, for all of us, there's a hidden tax out there. It's in your insurance premiums that you pay for your house, for your car. It's in the insurance premiums that are paid for by small businesses just to operate. And those dollars are going towards paying out lawsuits and settlements. Pennsylvania is known as a haven for these kinds of lawsuits. We certainly want to provide relief and compensation to individuals who have been hurt by a product or by negligence. But the Fair Share Act is one important piece of trying to treat really all of us fairly in the liability sector. It was a vote I was pleased to vote on.
In addition, unemployment compensation. There were a number of things with that.
Yeah. Pennsylvania has a very expensive unemployment system and expensive unemployment tax, and that is a tax on our businesses, like it or not. It is a safety net. We have to make sure that for those who are unemployed, that they have a chance to recover from that and then get back into the workplace. But we put into law that it was actually a requirement that they look for work in the first 23 weeks, and if they got a severance from the job where they were let go or laid off, that they would have to use at least some of that before they could collect unemployment compensation. Those sorts of reforms are necessary for us to be competitive, because believe me, businesses are looking around for which states offer a favorable climate for them to locate jobs in.
And also the workers' compensation fund as well.
Right, and this helps a lot of our startups. You know, businesses start usually as one person in their house or maybe in a small office. And it used to be the law in Pennsylvania that you couldn't get workers' compensation if you were a sole proprietor. For a contractor who might get hurt on the job, they couldn't get workers' compensation insurance. We gave some reform to that, changed that law so that now they're able to be insured.
Those are things that are law. Let's move now to a few things that are working their way through the system. The research and development tax credit. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. I have a bill actually to increase the research and development tax credit in Pennsylvania from, I think it's currently at $55 million, to take it up to $75 million. We have a lot of R&D in my area in southeastern Pennsylvania, and a lot of this work that is done in R&D doesn't yield immediate profits.
Sure.
It's a long-term process in the life sciences community. Many small and large businesses have taken advantage of this, and other states have these tax credits, so we have to be competitive with them.
You also have a bill dealing with prevailing wage. Can you explain what prevailing wage is and what your bill would do?
Right, and this is really a property tax relief bill. Prevailing wage essentially is Harrisburg telling all of the school districts, all of the local municipalities, the state itself, that whenever you do any kind of construction or renovation in your buildings, you have to pay a particular wage, and it's usually not the market wage. It's usually much higher. Doesn't make a lot of sense, goes on your property tax bill. I think we need to eliminate that or at least reform it in some way.
And then an interesting name for a tax credit, the angel investor tax credit. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and we're trying to do some tax reform up here, which is really about job creation. Okay, Pennsylvania ranks way down near the bottom of the 50 states in terms of how we burden our job sector with taxes. On some rankings, we are literally dead last or in the bottom 10 out of 50. We need to change that. We need to change that for our entrepreneurs. The angel investor tax credit essentially would say to an angel investor, you can get a tax credit if you're helping out a small business with some intellectual property. But we also just passed out of the House more comprehensive tax reform. We closed what has been called in the past the Delaware loophole. And this is where affiliated businesses are having transactions across the state line, and at times they've been used to avoid taxation in Pennsylvania. So we passed legislation that tightens up on that a good bit, but it also tries to reduce, or it does reduce, our corporate net profits tax, which is the highest in the country. It doesn't generate a ton of revenue out of the $27 billion, but it is a red flag to any company that's thinking about locating in Pennsylvania from across the globe or anywhere in the country. We need to reduce it a little bit. This would phase in a reduction down to 7%.
There's also a proposal out there sponsored by Majority Whip Stan Saylor. It's called Keystone Works. Can you talk about what that does for both a person looking for work and an employer?
Right. Well, we still have many people on unemployment compensation, although we are, I think, down just above 7%. So we're below the national average, which is relatively good, but still too many. We need to put more people to work. Those who are on unemployment compensation under this and other proposals in the House would essentially move them into a job at an employer that was participating in the program, continue to pay them unemployment compensation, but gradually phase down how much unemployment compensation they were receiving from the system and phase up the amount of compensation that they were receiving from the employer. It also gives them some on-the-job training, which would be helpful even if that job didn't materialize. So it's a good proposal like others. We should do more of that.
It feels like a whirlwind here that we just went through of all these proposals, but I think that's just a testimony to the work that you're doing and your colleagues are doing in the State House, so we thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Lori.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you have comments or questions about these or any other legislative topics, Representative Kampf's information will be shown in just a few seconds. I'm Laurie Bull. Thanks for watching and join us again for Legislative Report.